proliferation, streamlining maintenance. I mean, those are all aspects that have to be considered as part solutions to that problem. And then reason number 3, people don't know what they know. Some fascinating thoughts here. 10 years ago, how would you have guessed the outcome of email and ERP? Well, let's take ourselves back to the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, as ERP started to become more than just a pipe dream on somebody's drawing board, but large corporations began to implement ERP systems, there were 2 things that were grossly misunderstood about ERP. One was that it would take, on an average, 7 years to implement an enterprise-wide ERP system. That was much, much longer than was anticipated when these efforts first began. Very long implementations like that draw out the costs and reduce the benefits. And so that had significant negative impact on the ROI of ERP systems. But we didn't know that in the mid-90s. We didn't know that it would be that complicated. The other thing is that the actual benefit that's created by ERP systems is not as dramatic as was initially envisioned. And so we were way wrong in grossly overestimating the impact of ERP systems, especially for very large corporations. That's not to say that ERP systems still aren't valuable things to do in many cases for many corporations, but today when we talk about rolling out an ERP system, its scope enterprise-wide usually is considerably lessened from what was envisioned back in the mid-90s, because we've learned some lessons about where you don't put ERP, and the estimates on what the ROI of this is going to be usually is considerably lessened, because we know it's going to take a lot longer to roll out and start to experience those benefits than we thought back in the mid-90s. But let's talk about email. I was also around to think about email back in the mid-90s. I was running a company at the time, and my senior vice president came to me and said, we need to put an email system in the company. Now, you got to remember, the world was just a whole lot different in the early 90s, mid-90s than it is today. Most companies did not have email. And the initial implementation of our email system was only going to be used inside the company. We wouldn't even be using it to communicate with customers, because most of our customers didn't have email. We wouldn't be using it to communicate with our partners, because most of our partners didn't have email. And so there was a real question in my mind: why should we spend the money to put email in to allow folks in our company to send email back and forth to each other when they could always pick up the telephone, talk on the intercom, or meet with each other in a conference room? It wasn't clear to me why email had any ROI at all. And if the truth be known, the only reason that I agreed to fund email for our company at that particular time was I would have had a revolt on my hands by my subordinate executives, who said, no, we see a lot of at least time savings and productivity improvements that will accrue to us because people won't need to be interrupted until they're ready to be interrupted. And that made a little bit of sense to me, made a lot of sense to them, and so we put email in. So I was one of the cast of thousands out there in senior management in the mid-90s going, why do we need email? You have to remember another interesting thing. In the mid-90s, managers didn't know how to type. So, I mean, who was going to be writing the email? Those are interesting challenges that we had to face. Now, our culture looks back now, and email probably is the number one most valuable IT system in existence in most corporations. I mean, take away my telephones, take away my databases, take away all kinds of things, but don't take away my email. We didn't see that. And so this is an example of people don't know what they know. So a lot of times trying to put dollar values on the intangibles can be tricky, even if you can't, especially if you can't identify which intangible benefits need to have dollar signs next to them. In conclusion, then, when you think about ROI analysis, you need to think longer term, second, third, and fourth order benefits and costs. You need to not underestimate the benefits of simple standards and flexibility. You need to not underestimate the costs of managing the complexity. And you need to not fail to have a plan for and commitment to full end user acceptance. Thank you very much.